Welcome to the MamasteFit Podcast. In this episode, my husband Barron and I are going to be talking about navigating pregnancy after loss. So he's going to share his perspective as a male partner on what it was like going through miscarriages with me, and then also his perspective on what it was like navigating our subsequent pregnancies after our 2 pregnancy losses. Welcome to the MamasteFit Podcast. This is Gina, perinatal fitness trainer and birth doula.
And I'm Roxanne, labor and delivery nurse and student midwife.
And this is the MamasteFit Podcast, where we empower you on your prenatal fitness, birth, and postpartum return to fitness journey.
Our podcast shares how to move throughout your pregnancy to stay strong and comfortable, because pain is not a requirement of pregnancy. Understand the science of birth and how to approach recovery after birth.
We share our personal experience as mothers navigating this stage in our lives, plus our professional expertise as birth workers and fitness professionals.
Our goal is to help you feel confident as you navigate the perinatal timeframe for an empowering pregnancy, positive birth, and postpartum journey.
We are glad to have you with us on this journey and that you have chosen us to support you. Welcome to the MamasteFit Podcast. In this episode, my husband Barron and I are going to be talking about what it was like navigating pregnancy after loss. Because when you have a miscarriage or you have a pregnancy loss, the pregnancies that come after that definitely feel really different. And so for me, before we had our pregnancy losses, I kind of felt invincible. Like those kinds of things don't happen to me. They don't happen to us. And then we had 2 miscarriages in a row. And so that kind of feeling of invincibility went away, and it kind of felt like everything could happen at this point. And so it was definitely a lot harder for me emotionally and mentally navigating pregnancies after each loss. So first, I want to share our pregnancy loss stories so that you have an understanding of like what happened to us, and that may or may not be something that's familiar for you or an experience that you had for yourself. But know that every miscarriage is unique, every experience is unique, and even our own miscarriages, the emotional aspect of it was really different for both of them. So the first loss, we were about like 9 weeks pregnant. Around like 5 or 6 weeks, I had like a really small amount of bleeding. It was like just like very light brown. It wasn't anything that I was like, this is concerning. Like it definitely wasn't anywhere near enough to like soak a pad. It's just like kind of noticed it when I wiped. But other than that, like nothing else. Like I had pregnancy symptoms. There was nothing telling me that anything was wrong with the pregnancy other than this kind of like weird feeling of anxiety where I was like, I feel like something is up. And so at 9 weeks, I asked to get an ultrasound. Like we just happened to be in our hospital, and I asked if I can get an ultrasound early, and they like couldn't find anything. It was just like this blackness of where a baby was supposed to be. And I was like, well, that doesn't look normal, because with our first, we had gotten an ultrasound and it was like a little gummy bear. And I was like, oh, you could definitely see like the little hands and little feet. And there was like nothing. And so the OB was like, well, maybe you're just not like as far along as you think you are. Like maybe you're only like 4 or 5 weeks. And I was like, I'm not that off on my due date. Like I may be like a week off, but I'm not like an entire month off. Like there's no way that that's possible. So we went for a few more ultrasounds, and each time it was nothing. I kept thinking, I was like scrolling forums in like the middle of the night, trying to see if anyone else like had this, and all of these like hopeful stories of like, oh, like I was going in for my D&C and then they found the baby, and I was like, that's going to be us. And then each ultrasound, when there was still nothing, it was like, all right, that's not going to be us. And it was nice in a way to have like those 2 to 3 weeks to kind of process like what was happening and like know that it was coming, but it also just kind of felt like we were delaying the inevitable. And so eventually we decided that we were going to take medication at home, like a pill at home, to have a miscarriage, because I had had a missed miscarriage. So the baby stopped developing at some point, or maybe there never was a baby, who knows? And my body like didn't recognize that there was no longer a pregnancy. Like it was still going through all of the motions. And so eventually my body may have just naturally miscarried, but like the longer you kind of sit around in that state, like potentially like the more infection that can happen. And for me, I just kind of like wanted it to be over. Like I was kind of tired of being in this weird limbo, and like we really were trying to conceive our second child, and like Barron was getting ready to deploy. And so it was like, let's just kind of get this over with. So how did you feel during our first loss?
So I think for me, there's probably like a mix of emotions as far as what was going on. I think like initially it was like confusion, kind of like you hinted on. Is this actually happening to us? Like, what's going on? I think like for me, miscarriage, I always think kind of the WebMD scenario where it's like the very worst case. I mean, I think when I was thinking miscarriages up to this point, I'm thinking, very, very late in the game in pregnancy, which is, extremely horrific. Not that any loss isn't. So again, it kind of the way that the doctors and the medical personnel were treating it was just kind of like, hey, like this might not be a viable pregnancy. Let's wait and see. I was just kind of like, well, why can't you guys just tell us right now? I think even the initial ultrasound was like one of the most confusing things was, so it was like the ultrasound technician, just like same thing. If you go to get an X-ray, like they may let you peek on your X-ray right after it gets taken, but they're not allowed to tell you that a bone's broken. And I think it was kind of like that. Like we saw something was up, but they couldn't tell us officially. So there was kind of this like limbo of waiting time. So yeah, like the confusion, the breaking the notion that we are or you are, unbreakable or whatnot. That was like a new feeling because it relatively our first pregnancy I felt was pretty smooth. So that was weird. I think the biggest thing for me was once we did get like the final like call on it and we did the medication stuff at home, was me trying to like interpret what your emotions were, because I know that there was this feeling of anxiety of getting this period of time over with, so that we could move on and start over, obviously, because time was ticking, not like it was a race to see like how fast we could have our second child. But I know that we both wanted to get on with it. So it was a balance between, hey, we're past it, but also affording like the appropriate time like to grieve. And so I think that for me, and I may be getting too far ahead, but I think that the biggest thing that I could recommend for like fathers and everyone, has different levels of emotional intelligence. I'm not the smartest person when it comes to it, but as far as like reading the room or reading the emotions of your spouse, I'll just go ahead and say it for the dads or for the birth partners. This is real. It's loss, regardless of how early or how late it is in a pregnancy. It's a very delicate time. So the best thing that you can do is be supportive for your partner, regardless of how eager you guys are to move on. So that was the one thing that I think like my gut told me to do, even though I wasn't naturally feeling probably the same emotions that you were. For me, it was probably, like I said, a little bit more frustration and confusion. But I was like, I think this is a really big deal for us. So I decided that my best part was just to try to honor you and give you the space and be there. And luckily, I was able to get some time off from work before I had to deploy. So that was I think was helpful for us in healing. We were able to take a trip to go see some friends, just to kind of get away from home. So that I think that those things definitely help. So that was probably what I would say generally is synopsis of how I felt around the first go around.
I would definitely say, like, don't assume that you know how somebody is feeling or exactly what they're wanting, and then also don't feel like you need to fix it. That was definitely something that I didn't experience from you, but like other people in our lives, I definitely felt like we're trying to like fix how I was feeling and like make me feel better. And I think what I needed was someone to just hold space for me and acknowledge that this was a hard moment for us as a family and that it was going to take us however long to navigate it. But I didn't want anybody to tell me like, it's fine, or, oh, there wasn't even a baby. Like that kind of stuff would have been like really hurtful, I think, for me. So I was really glad that you just kind of gave me the space to feel whatever it is that like I needed to feel. But I will say, like, in hindsight, I felt like I was very like selfish in my like view of it, because I was only kind of thinking about like me and my experience through this, because I was the one that was like physically going through it. And it wasn't, I think, until a little bit later that I was like, oh, actually, I think like Barron was also going through his own experience, and like nobody was really like checking in on him. But like you aren't the one going through it like physically, but like it was still like our pregnancy and like our baby. So I think that's something in hindsight for myself that I wish I had held space for you as well on, like, well, how are you doing? Like, what's going on with you? I was just like so consumed with my own thing.
Yeah, and not to say that you took it harder than I did or anything, but as far as my read was that you needed a little bit more support. So at least for me, like when I'm in that mode, like I'm not necessarily thinking about myself, but it is important to check in on your own feelings when stuff like this happens. And I did have a really good support network with my friends, and my work was very, very good. I think that one of the things, with our society, we kind of tend what Gina was just talking about is when somebody's going through a period of loss or a hard time, like a natural reaction is not as much to not necessarily acknowledge their grief. I think in general terms we do a good job of that. But when you say like people can be sometimes the end effect is like dismissive. I think that typically happens when you try to rationalize your experience or something that happened in your life with what they have going on. Whether it's a loss in the family, someone be like, oh, it happened to me too. Like you'll be fine. I think like a better approach potentially is to maybe step inside of their grief with them, and just be there with them and acknowledge it and not try to make it necessarily about you or something that's happened to you. So
There was something that I read once that said when somebody's sharing an experience with you, especially like a more tragic or like something that is upsetting for them. So for us, like sharing about our losses, there's sometimes a tendency to want to share a similar story in this effort to like bond with the person that's going through something. But like inherently this becomes kind of changing the topic to yourself because it's more comfortable at that point. And so you kind of take away the attention from the person that's going through something in this attempt to like make yourself feel more comfortable and to bond with them. And so like, I didn't really have this with like the loss, like nobody, well, outside of that one doctor, and we'll talk about that. Nobody trying to like one up me on like loss, like even our friends who had miscarriages or like stillborns and like losses much later in pregnancies, not that there's like any value to be put on like when you had a loss, how upset you're allowed to be. But I didn't have anybody that was like, oh, well, I had, 4 pregnancy losses and I'm fine. You'll be fine too, which I really appreciated. Like the folks that shared their story with me during that time were like, hey, I had a loss too. I'm here with you. Like, I understand what you're going through. Like, whatever you need, like, I'm here. And that was like really a different approach, in my opinion, than like, hey, I had this experience. This is what I did. You'll be fine. Just letting them know, like, I have this shared experience with you, and I'm here to help you navigate it however you need, was just like a really different approach. Because I did find it really helpful for folks to tell me that they've also had losses, because it made me feel a lot less alone and a lot less ashamed of it, because we have this whole notion that we can't announce pregnancies until the second trimester when it's like safe. And it's not necessarily like it's safer in the second trimester, because we were almost in our second trimester. Yeah. And so it was like, well, we were already almost there and we had a miscarriage. But I think it's more of like the comfort of others, because, we don't want to put this burden of grief on them. Like if you have a miscarriage, just suffer alone and quietly. But I felt like it was really hard to have gone through all of that just by ourselves. And so I was really glad that we like told people that we were pregnant and that we had this whole like support team kind of set up so that we had people there that were willing to support us and also share their own experiences in a way that was like, I've gone through it. This is still all about you though. Like, I'm here to support you. So I think that was a big thing for us with our first.
Yeah, I think if I just add one thing, one of our close friends just lost his mother just this past month. We got a chance to go to the funeral, but kind of in the immediate aftermath, and we were talking to him. He share with us a few pretty good podcasts. I don't think you got a chance to listen to them, but I did. And one of them was with Stephen Colbert and Anderson Cooper, just kind of talking about how they navigated through some losses in their family. And I think one of the biggest takeaways that I got from that was, our society, just it's always evolving, right? But from a social standpoint, one of the things that I feel like's happened is we've gotten a little bit more like isolated, and with that, we've allowed people to, in a lot of aspects, to grieve alone or to feel that they have to grieve alone. But like you said, it was really comforting, and in our case, to just be able to share that with people, what was going on with people, and to have the, kind of a collective response of people were there with us. And I think not saying that, this happens because people don't have networks, but I think that's one of the things that was probably good, was that, we did have other people to share with. So that's so talking about such a lonely thing to have happen, is to just go through something like that by yourself. Like humans, we're not meant to do that. We're meant to share. So sharing happy moments and sharing grief too, I think is big.
And I mean, even thinking like we were both going through our own experiences like together, like how much harder would that have been to also have been each other's only source of support, and having to like grieve while simultaneously like comfort your partner. Like maybe that's why I was a little bit more focused on myself, because I knew that we had the opportunity to, because we had established this community of people that knew we were pregnant, and that I knew that you were receiving support as well. Like, I don't know, maybe that's what I did. We'll go with that.
It works.
And so most people say, or I guess research says, that when you have one pregnancy loss, the chances of you having another one is like minuscule. Like it just doesn't happen. And then our next pregnancy was a loss. And I was like, the world is ending. Like, what just happened? And this one was really early. So we got a positive pregnancy test. I immediately went and got blood work that came back positive. So it wasn't like I made up a line, which like Roxanne says I sometimes do, is I make up lines on these tests and they all end up being positive. But I was like, I went and got blood work right away because I wanted to get established with care because of what happened during our last pregnancy. And I was like, I want an ultrasound as soon as possible. Like, I want to make sure that everything is going well, because we're trying to have another child, and I'm tired of like this like prolonged timeline. And you had also deployed like in between these two losses. And so we were already kind of like delayed on our ability to conceive our second child. And so got a positive blood test. And then like 3 days later, I started bleeding. Like it was really different from the first. Like I went to the bathroom, I wiped, and it was just bright red blood. And I was like, well, that's not normal. And drove to the ER, told you that I was going to the ER. I think I had Adeline with me. I actually got pulled over on the way. And like that poor soldier that pulled me over, I'm just like sobbing in the front seat, and he's like, go ahead. And then we went into the ER and waited there for like 4 hours. And the nurse was like really nice and check in, because she was like, oh, what are you here for? And I was like, I'm bleeding. Like I'm like really early in my pregnancy. And she's like, well, how many pregnancies have you had? And I was like, 3. So this one, a loss, and then our child. And then she's like, okay, well, how many like pregnancy losses have you had? And I was like, 2, I guess. And she's like, well, don't count yourself out. And I was kind of like, I think we both know that I can count myself out of this. But I guess like that's not always true. Some people do bleed heavily in their first trimester. Like Roxanne had some severe bleeding in her first trimester, and Colin is fine. But I was kind of like, yeah, I think we both know that this is not okay. And then we went back to see the doctor, who, like, I don't even know what he looks like, but I think if I ever interacted with him again, I would let him know how shitty of a person he was during that moment. And I guess there was a lot of pressure to put on him. So he walks in and he's like, okay, well, you came in on Saturday or whatever day it was. You had a positive blood test. You came in today and it's negative. So what are you here for? And I'm like, that was not a great introduction. And I was like, well, I guess a miscarriage. And he's like, all right, well, you're really early, so I don't think I need to do a vaginal exam. So I'll just, check your abdomen if you want to lay down. And I was just like, okay, like, sounds good. And so like I lean back and I start crying at this point because I'm just like, this dude is an asshole. And he's like not being very empathetic to my situation. And in hindsight, I'm like, man, I wish I like said something to him like, hey, you motherfucker. But, you're in the moment and you're just like very overwhelmed with emotion. And so when I started crying, he was kind of like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then this is when he was like, well, my daughter's had 4 miscarriages and she wanted to have a bunch of kids, so you'll be fine. And I was like, thank you. Like, and in that moment, like looking back, I'm like, I wish I had said like, well, it's not a competition. Like I'm allowed to be upset right now and you're going to sit here with me while I'm upset. But it was just so like, it happened so quick and like, everyone tells you that you don't have more than 1 miscarriage in a row. Like you have 1, and then having 2 in a row is just unheard of. Like that doesn't happen to anybody. And then we had 2 in a row, and I was like, all right, we're doomed. Like we're gonna have 1 child. Like this is it. But it felt a lot different this time around because it was so much earlier, and we didn't have that same like lead up to it where I was like confused because I didn't have any pregnancy symptoms yet. I was 5 weeks pregnant, and it was just like, and it's over. And I was like, okay. Like I literally just told a bunch of people like, what is, and so that one was definitely like a lot more like confusing. Like I don't feel like I had time to like really process it. It almost felt like it wasn't real, but it was real. And I think some people would even count that as like a chemical pregnancy, or like I think some folks would even say like, it wasn't anything, like it wasn't even a baby at that point. But it was still just like confusing because we just had a loss, and I was like, what do you mean? Like this is not supposed to happen like 2 times in a row. Like it's supposed to be 1 and then we're good. Like, and so it was like super confusing for me, like with the second loss. So how was it for you?
So for me, I think this was probably like my first experience actually like dealing with something I would reflect back on with the term like bedside manner. So this is ER docs. Bedside manner was horrible.
It was awful.
So I remember like learning that term. I was like, well, it's kind of one of those like terms that are like you could generally put together via like context clues, but I'd never heard it used before. I was like, I know what bedside manner means after this. So definitely an example, kind of what I was leading off with on our previous discussion about like, the grief and somebody not necessarily trying to like one up, but the effect is just like to marginalize somebody's whatever they're feeling, whether it's intended or not. It's just, I don't know. I feel like I'm at this point in time. I don't even know if this dude was like an army doc. I think he might have been a civilian doctor. Regardless, like just from my time in the military, like I'm just so used to that where something bad happens to you and somebody's always had it worse, and they want to tell you about how much worse they had it than you to make you like feel better, or I guess to be tougher. So that was like the feeling that I had going out of that ER room. I think that it was different than the first loss too. It was like early enough to where like it was more frustration. It wasn't as drawn out, but maybe the quickness of it just happening, like positive test and bleeding, then next thing you know, we're in the emergency room, and it's like boom, like that happened. And I think that may have been harder to process. Maybe I never completely closed that out until later. So that is probably one of the things. If something happened like fast versus like long and drawn out, like you don't necessarily get a chance to deal with it, for better or for worse. I will say with this one, this probably changed me forever how I feel about positive pregnancy tests. So like if we had just had like a straight run of a positive pregnancy test followed by complete pregnancy, I probably would still have the same reaction when you're like, oh, I got a positive test. I'm still anxious to see, like, hey, it's positive. That's good. That's good. But now it's kind of like, okay, this is like part of a checklist into having a kid, but it's not necessarily like getting the golden ticket, you know.
Yeah, it's not a
Willy Wonka
guarantee just because
reference.
you have the positive tests. It's like weeks of like anxiety, like waiting till we can have an ultrasound and waiting until like I could feel baby moving. And I don't know. So like right after that loss, we pretty much immediately conceived our son. Yeah. And we had a successful pregnancy, no complications. Like it was pretty straightforward. And it was, of the 3 pregnancies that we've had since the 2 losses, the hardest one for me mentally. I don't know if it was for you too. And I think it was probably because like we didn't actually have time to kind of grieve and process like what just happened. Like we were just like, all right, let's move on. Like we're just gonna just forget about it and just keep going. And I think the fear from that second loss was so just like, what? Like that doesn't happen to people. Like when we conceived Owen, I was just afraid like the whole pregnancy. Because with our first loss, like I had symptoms, like everything was progressing normally. And so I couldn't even rely on pregnancy symptoms as like a sign that everything was going well. And that made it really hard for me because I was like, well, I can't even understand that I'm nauseous and tired, that this means pregnancy. And so with that pregnancy, we got an ultrasound, I think, at like 6 or 7 weeks, and we can see that something was happening. And then we were really fortunate with the clinic that we were at because they kind of just viewed me as high risk because of recurrent miscarriage. And so I was coming in every single week to get blood work done, to get ultrasounds, and we started doing blood work like right away too. So as soon as I found out I was pregnant, they had me come in like weekly, or I think it was like every other day, to get blood work so that we can see that the levels were rising of like the HCG. And then we were going in every week for ultrasounds. And it was all the way up until I think like 11 or 13 weeks that we got ultrasounds. And then at that point, the OB was like, hey, like, it seems like everything is progressing really well. Like, there's nothing that's telling us that like something's wrong. And it seems like this is going to be a normal pregnancy for you. And, you know, we've kind of surpassed the point of when you had your first loss. Like, do you feel comfortable kind of decreasing the number of appointments that we have and transitioning to midwifery care? Because I was with the OBs at this point. And I think I was like going into the second trimester, and I was like, you know what, like we've passed the point when we had the first loss. Like, so it almost felt like this milestone at that point. Like, you know, he's developing pretty normally. We can see that he's like growing each week, and he seems to be growing like on a good track. And so I was like, okay, yeah, we can transition to being low risk again and moving and transitioning to midwifery care. Like, I feel comfortable doing that. But there was always this just lingering feeling of fear and anxiety that like something was going to happen, because at this point, like, I initially thought nothing would ever happen. And then we had that first loss. And then I was like, well, nobody has 2 losses in a row. And then we had 2 losses in a row. And so just this like feeling of invincibility was just shattered. And it just felt like anything could happen at this point. And so like I felt like I couldn't even bond with him during the pregnancy. Like there always just kind of felt like this feeling of detachment and just like being really scared of the experience. And it wasn't until I think into the 3rd trimester that I finally bought him something. Like I went and bought him like a onesie. And like the only reason why I did that was because I had met somebody on Instagram who had had 2 late pregnancy losses. So it was like after 20 weeks, where like she went and had to have like an induced labor to like give birth to her babies. And she was like, you know, like I never regretted bonding with my babies, even though I lost them. Like it would have still hurt the same, regardless if I felt connected with this pregnancy, if I was excited for this baby. She's like, yeah, I was always like nervous, but it would have hurt the same, even if I bonded with my baby, and if anything, I probably would have had more regrets that I didn't enjoy the time that I had with them. And so that was kind of like my mentality for like the rest of that pregnancy and our next 2 pregnancies was kind of like, well, I can either just stay really detached and like in this attempt to protect myself. I'm going to be anxious either way. Like, it's not like if I bond with him, I'm suddenly going to not be anxious. But at least I can enjoy the time that I have with him. And hopefully and obviously we met him and he's still here and having a great time and is super healthy. But it's like, I could either like celebrate the time and enjoy the time that I have with this baby for as long as it is and just be thankful for that, or I can just live in fear that whole time. And so like I chose to, okay, it's going to feel the same regardless. If anything, I would regret like not being excited. And looking back on our losses, like I was happy that we told people right away and that there was other people excited for the pregnancy and excited for that baby, even though we didn't get to meet those babies. Like there was still like a lot of love for them and people were still excited for them and like we were excited for them. And I think I would have felt really sad if they were just like a secret, like this like old family secret that we never told anybody. Our daughter keeps asking us like what our family secrets are. So I'm glad that those 2 babies are not family secrets. But yeah, it took me a really, really long time to bond with him. And then I think postpartum, the anxiety that I just held on to this whole pregnancy, like was really like pronounced like when he was born, because with Adeline, she's like climbing everything and we're like, whatever, like she's building strong legs and she's doing all this cool stuff. And with like Owen, we were like, I felt like I was so much more nervous about the stuff that he was doing. And maybe that's why he's a really cautious child now. But I just felt more nervous about him because it was just like, oh my God, like what if something happens? Like, and then that just translated into like postpartum anxiety and OCD, and I sought therapy for it. But it was like all the anxiety from that pregnancy, from those 2 losses, just like continued into the postpartum. And it was like so much worse then because like when they're in your belly, it's like really unknown, but at least they're like safe in that space. And then postpartum, they're like outside and the whole world is dangerous. And oh my goodness. But yeah, his pregnancy, I think, was the hardest one, like mentally and emotionally for me, because it just felt so like fragile, even though he's totally fine. But it just felt so like, I don't know, really scary for me. How was his pregnancy for you?
It was also during like the start and like the beginning of COVID too, like as far as like what the world was like navigating. So that was also, I think for me was a pretty big thing with that pregnancy. Like the one thing that I think was hardest for me to kind of come to terms with was when you said that you wanted to do a home birth, which was like you said, you'd been in like OB care. And then made a decision to switch to a home birth, and I knew you had everything lined up, and I had supported home births before, so it wasn't like I knew like part of the anxiety was that I just didn't know anything about them. So I think really like when I look back at it, that was one of the hardest things for me to like let go of. Was like, we're going to be outside the hospital. You were talking about like the babies being outside of your body. Like for me, it was like, we're going to be outside the hospital. Is this safe? So I was a little nervous about that at first. But that's a separate podcast. I think for me, kind of going back to the like not processing like the back-to-back kind of stuff. I don't know that once we regularly actually saw, ultrasound pictures of Owen, that I necessarily had the same anxiety, because I think at that point I was like, okay, there's a baby, there's a heartbeat, he's growing, and everything was like progressing week after week. So I was definitely reassured by all of that, but it was definitely tough. Just in my mind, like kind of getting back to like the initial phases of the pregnancy, to the same, like even with this one, it's just like the positive pregnancy test. It's happy, but again, it's like, this is just a check mark. This is a ticket to the end necessarily. So I would say just the way I am when I know that there's still room for uncertainty. Like my brain will try to, like, not necessarily marginalize it, but by thinking like, oh well, if it doesn't happen, then at least I didn't like devote like the emotion to it necessarily. So it's not like that. I would say like for me, the way I was dealing with it is I'm just kind of cautious, I guess. There's still emotion involved. I'd still be disappointed, but I just don't think there's anything that will ever bring back the initial excitement of finding out that we were pregnant with Adeline. Because again, like that initial like entry moment into the pregnancy was getting the pregnancy test, and like, God, now it's just not the same.
Yeah, it's like that like magic of entering the pregnancy is kind of clouded by this like, it's almost like ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel like I don't have the same feeling of like magic and wonder that I did with our first pregnancy, because I know the things that can happen now. And so it's kind of like you're almost like jaded, I guess. And so I'm still always excited when I have a positive pregnancy test, and I'm always like excited at each step of the way. But each step is like, I feel very like anxious, I guess. And like, oh, I wonder if this is when we find out something's wrong, or maybe this is the time we find out something's wrong. And for me, it's like every ultrasound throughout our pregnancy is like, well, maybe this is the one that they tell us something's wrong.
So it doesn't go away at all?
I mean, it's definitely different from like the initial part where it's like positive pregnancy test, and then we have to wait like 3 to 4 weeks before we can get an ultrasound. Like that kind of gap is like really hard for me mentally, because I'm like, I could be having all these pregnancy symptoms and there could just be nothing happening. So something else that helped me kind of with my anxiety, like going into this current pregnancy, was preparing when we were like preparing to try to conceive. So even before we were trying to conceive, like all the things that we can do to like give us the best chance that we could. And one of those things was taking needed supplements. And so for me, I was taking their egg quality support bundle, which included needed egg quality support. It included their CoQ10. I was also taking their prenatal vitamins, their choline, and their omegas to try to make sure that my eggs were as good as possible going in, because we're also like super old. We're like 35 now. It's geriatric pregnancy is 36. So wanting to make sure that I was setting myself up as best as possible to go into this pregnancy. Part of that was making sure I was taking the right supplements, also like focusing on like the nutrition that I was, making sure I was eating enough food, trying to sleep a little bit more. That was not successful. I did not sleep any more than I normally did, continuing to move my body. And I was also doing like tons of blood work with my provider. If you want more on like what we did to prep to try to conceive, it was like a few episodes ago. I can't remember the number. We'll link it in the show notes. But we have a whole episode on like everything that I was doing to prepare for my current pregnancy. And in addition to the things that I was doing to prepare for the pregnancy, Barron was also taking needed sperm support plus, their bundle, to make sure that we had the best quality sperm possible. So if you're interested in trying out needed for either to support your preconception, your pregnancy, or your postpartum experience, or if you are a male partner, they also have a men's line that can support you as well. You can check them out at thisisneeded.com, and you can use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order or 3 months of subscription.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess to be more specific, like we had an ultrasound today. So one of Gina's friends has a business in town that does like early ultrasounds, but not with a provider. So I think that those, like the early ones, like the 6, 7, 8 week, whatever, that we were doing, those to me, like I understand what we're looking at on the ultrasound, and it's exciting when you see like growth from like 1 week to the next, and that things still look the same way that they're supposed to based off of pictures of ultrasounds from like the previous kids that we've had. But I think for me, I don't necessarily now get past the comparing it to whatever the timeline was until I start seeing like what looks like not necessarily what looks like a human being.
It's like
but
a little blob right now.
it's like, this gives from a peanut, and then you can't really see the detail, and it's like, okay, that's a head, and there's a heartbeat, like that kind of thing. I think that's really what makes me finally realize that things are like on track, I guess. But I wouldn't say that I had like anxiety through the entire pregnancy. 'Cause even with Owen, I think I was anxious, and my like fear they centered less around the chance for loss and more around like first time doing a home birth with him. So that was, not to like overshadow the topic of this podcast, but that's how big of a deal doing the home birth for the first time was for me. Like I was excited about it. I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad that we've just continued to do it. But yeah, that was definitely, just if you're asking, that was what I was thinking about more that go around.
For me, the next two pregnancies though, so Sophie's pregnancy and then this one, were very different than Owen's. Like the initial like magic of finding out that we're pregnant was still met with a lot of like caution. And somebody did suggest that like I could have gotten blood work done to like see that my HCG levels were rising, which in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I guess I could have done that in between when I got a positive test and the ultrasound. But that would have required me like coordinating with like my primary care provider to come in. And it's a lot harder when you've got like 3 kids running around. And so it's like, I'll just wait for that first ultrasound. But with Sophie's, like going in for the weekly ultrasound starting, I think at like 7 weeks, was like really helpful for me to see like, all right, she's growing like she's supposed to. And then once I could like feel her like moving and stuff, like I just felt at much more ease and like at peace during her pregnancy, where I was like, we're either going to meet this baby or we're not. I'm still excited. Like I feel optimistic and comfortable with the pregnancy. Hopefully I don't get proven wrong. And we had like no complications, and we went and gave birth to her at home, and it was great. And so I think for me, like being one pregnancy away from the loss, like it didn't feel so new. Like we had gone through an uncomplicated pregnancy at this point. Like there was no like scares, nothing to like make me nervous. And so I just felt like a little bit more like confident, I guess, going into her pregnancy, that it didn't feel as like anxiety ridden as like Owen's. Like I was still checking every single time I wiped. Like I'd look to see if there was blood her entire pregnancy, but I wasn't like as scared the whole time. And now she's a fearless little child. So like, I don't know, maybe that relates. Owen's like our little cautious child, very calculated. Sophie and Adeline are like wild childs. So maybe that had something to do with it. But with being one pregnancy away from the loss, it just didn't feel as intense or as scary, because we had gone through a successful pregnancy and birth with no complications. Like his birth, I would describe as like perfect. It was like exactly what I envisioned in my head. And Sophie's was not exactly what I envisioned, but it was still wonderful. And so it was like, all right, I went through this, this wonderful birth. I had a really great support throughout the beginning of my pregnancy. Like we had wonderful support with our midwife that we transitioned care to when we decided to give birth at home. We were starting care with her in Sophie's pregnancy, like no complications throughout, and then a pretty straightforward birth like with her. And so I think being like further removed from the loss like made me a lot less anxious throughout the pregnancy. I felt like I could bond with her a lot earlier, and just felt like more confident overall throughout her pregnancy. And then for this one, it feels similar to hers, where I still have that initial anxiety in the beginning where we're waiting to see, is everything okay? Like, is something happening? Like, because again, the first loss, we had all the symptoms. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I didn't feel any, like I was nauseous, like I had sensitive gag reflex, I was tired, and then there was nothing. And so pregnancy symptoms aren't always very reassuring for me, but Like last week we went to get an ultrasound and it was like black, nothing. And I was like, there's supposed to be something there. Like, and when the ultrasound tech was like, well, you sure you're not like 4 or 5 weeks? Like when she said 4 weeks, I was like, this is over. Like, there's no baby. Like we're going through the same fucking thing that we did that first loss. Because if she had just said like, are you sure you're not like 5 weeks? I would have been like, well, I mean, I could be like a few days off. When she said 4 weeks, I was like, I'm not 2 weeks off. Like, there's no, like this early, there's no way that I'm 2 weeks off. Like,
Well, what did we determine?
and then I was just like a few days off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, maybe.
It's like you had to have been off, right?
I mean, I don't know. It was really confusing. But when she said 4 weeks, are you sure you're not 4 or 5? I was like, well, I'm definitely not 4. And so if you're looking at that and you think that's what a 4-week uterus looks like, I'm fucked. Like, there's no baby. And so I was kind of shocked today when we went in. Like, I was optimistic. I was like, it'll be fine. We'll see a little speck. It'll be great. And it was this giant ass thing. I was like, God damn.
It was like a week, but it was also a week.
It was a week difference.
It was a week plus a few days.
Yeah.
Right?
Week and a day.
So we did last Monday.
We did Tuesday.
Tuesday? Anyway,
Anyways, still, it was a little bit over a week, and it was a huge difference. And as soon as she like did the ultrasound, and I saw this like bloop, little blob, and you could see the flicker like super clearly, I was like, all right, we good. But last week when she was like 4, are you sure you're not 4 to 5? I'm like, it's over. Like, God damn it. I'm just gonna be super nauseous until like someone decides to tell me that I had a miscarriage. But then there was a giant ass baby there, and I was like, all right, we good. So this one I'm feeling a little bit more confident. Again, similar to Sophie's, where it's not so like, I don't know. I feel good about it because I don't have another choice. Like I could feel super scared the whole time and be really, really anxious the entire time. And it's just like one of those things where like I have to just let go of the control. And that's something that I've learned from like our births. It's just you just have to let go of like the control that you want to maintain over things, because like you can't control everything. Like you could set the stage and you can take care of different factors to like put things in your favor, but like you can never be fully in control of how the pregnancy goes or how your birth goes, and you can have plans for things, but ultimately like there is a whole part of just like letting go of the control and accepting whatever happens is what's going to happen. And I think that's something that I've learned to do over these past 2 pregnancies. And I think it's because I'm just further removed from the losses, where they just feel so much further away and just they're not as fresh of an experience. And then I also know like, hey, if we do have a loss, we have an incredible support team that's available to us to help us through it. And then we'll kind of go from there. And so I just feel more comfortable in the experience of pregnancy, other than the nausea. I would like to not be super nauseous if possible. But I don't feel as anxious or scared. And I think it's just because we've had more time since the losses. But there's always this kind of like underlying feeling of, is everything okay? Is everything progressing well? Like, are we going to find out that there's an issue? But it's not as like overwhelming as it was with Owen's pregnancy. But yeah, how is Sophie's and this one for you?
I think for me with Sophie's pregnancy, I was like gone a lot that year with work stuff. There was a lot going on in the world then. I would say that I think one of the things you said earlier was during that pregnancy you were a little less stressed out, or less anxious. So I think I was relying for feedback from you for like the appointments that you were having and like what you told me was going on, just to like to help, so that was I think what shaped most of how I felt with that pregnancy. Like, so I just didn't really think that there was anything that was going on, but I was also a little, not like detached, but I was also just not there physically to kind of go through a lot of the appointments with you. But the ones that I was able to make, everything seemed like it was going good, because I think Kai deployed like almost right after we found out that.
I think so, yeah. Actually, I don't remember.
Yeah. Let's just go.
Oh yeah, you did. You did deploy right after we found out, and then I think a few times during the pregnancy.
Yeah, because I mean, I was right after that. I was back. I had a few weeks off, and then I switched jobs, and then I was like gone again for a bunch of stuff. So anyway, that one was like not by default, but like by like nature of me being gone a little bit different. But I would say it more so mirrored, the emotions that you were broadcasting to me. So they were a little bit less stressful, less anxious. And then the birth was, I think by that point we'd, already had one home birth under our belts outside of it being during the middle of a hurricane. I think everything was pretty smooth. And so far with this one, I think after today, like I'm able to, yeah, there's something growing. So we had the pregnancy test, and then a good ultrasound today, and then hopefully tomorrow we'll find out gender from blood test stuff that we did. And so I think once we get that back, I think it'll be even another step to being not necessarily like that's not real, but a little bit more reinforcing that everything's still moving forward. So I think that's, again, I'm not necessarily like suppressing my emotions. They're just building, I guess.
It's a gradual progression of excitement. And I think it's the same for me. Like, it's not like all instantly like super excited, joyous, like magical experience because of those losses. It's like, I think like you said, like this checklist of like, okay, when we make it to this next milestone, we can be even more excited. When we make it to this milestone. So that's what it is for me. It's like these different steps along the way. Just, I feel like, okay, I'm just going to make it to this point, and I'll worry about what comes after that. And that helps me mentally too.
And like you said, we're not alone. So it's not something that we're, even though we both have these probably similar, sounds like, I think we haven't really talked about this before now, like this whole like checklist thing that we were describing. It's not written down anywhere. It's just the best metaphor I can think of. But I would say that we're not alone. And that's because like I'm not necessarily, I can't tell anybody about this until we hit this certain point. So like sharing and the fact that we're expecting is still exciting, and it's something that we're still doing publicly. So it's not like necessarily that we're afraid, to tell. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at.
I also feel like everyone that we've told has been really excited. And I think I kind of feed off that excitement too, because they're not looking at it like, oh, what if you guys have a loss? Like, they're all like, oh, when's the baby due? Like, let's start planning around that, which has always been really cool too. Or like very like, that hypes me up.
Yeah, I think for me more so now, people are like, oh man, 4? Yeah, you're gonna have one of those sprint vans soon, huh? Like, no.
We got an expedition that's big enough. It's big enough.
No more. By the way, we're officially done after this.
We are done. We don't have any more room in that car, and I don't want to upgrade again.
No.
Thank you for listening to the MamasteFit Podcast. If you enjoy this episode, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you get notified anytime we release new episodes. We release new educational episodes on Wednesdays and new birth stories every Friday. If you're pregnant and you're looking for more support throughout your pregnancy, you can join our online childbirth education course or prenatal fitness programs, and you can also bundle them to save 15% off. If you're postpartum, we have our postpartum education course, which now includes infant CPR and infant massage, and then also our postpartum return to fitness programs, where we have a bunch of different programs depending on what your sport is. So if you're trying to get back to just general lifting, running, Olympic weightlifting, or if you're a first responder or military service member, we do have programs specific to all those as well. And if you're a professional and you want to learn more from our expertise and earn CEUs, you can join our birth worker course or our pre- and postnatal fitness trainer course. This podcast is sponsored by Needed, which is a perinatal nutrition company that supports optimal nourishment throughout the entire perinatal timeframe. You can check them out at thisisneeded.com and use code MamastePod to get 20% off your first order or 3 months of subscription.